Welcome and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Roush. I'm your own personal sales maven here to offer you tips and strategies and techniques to master your sales conversations. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about how to recognize and act on a buying signal, even when it's in a kind of non-traditional setting, and then how to follow up on that buying signal without fear of rejection. Now, the reason I'm sharing this came up in a coaching session recently with a client. I have been talking about buying signals for many, many years. I wrote my second book around it. I am a huge proponent of when you know how to recognize and act on buying signals, it makes a big difference in your conversions, how many new clients you're bringing in the door. And when you feel hesitant to act on them because maybe they come in a non-traditional type of way to you or from somebody that you didn't really even think of as a potential client for you, it's still an opportunity for you to take action. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. As I dig in, I'm going to share the two main things that keep us from acting on buying signals and why we're missing these and some of the stuff that's going on for us internally. And then we'll also be talking about why it's so important because, well, here's the thing. If you don't act on a buying signal when you get one and or don't follow up with it, you are unintentionally sending a message that you're not interested in that person's business. And that's probably not the case. So, super important that we get clear on acting on them and letting people know, hey, I would be honored to work with you. And if you're not sending that message, they're going to make up some other type of story as to why you don't want to work with them or why you don't like them or why you don't think they can afford your services, all kinds of crazy stories that people make up. I hear them all the time. All right. So, first and foremost, in case you've never heard this before, what is a buying signal? A buying signal is a verbal or a nonverbal cue that somebody gives that indicates that they're interested. So, this can come in the form of them asking you questions. This can come in the form of somebody making a positive comment to you. It can also come in the form of people talking about a negative experience that they've had with somebody who does what you do. These are all potential buying signals. Now, I mentioned I wrote a book around this. There are 17 buying signals in that book, and I go into much more detail. I have a whole training on this inside the Sales Maven Society. I recommend that my members watch it like at least once a year because it's easy to miss some of the more subtle buying signals. And that's again why I chose to have this podcast episode today and kind of dig into this because the client that I had mentioned that this came up in a coaching session was having lunch with a friend. So, not somebody that they really thought of as a potential client. They weren't really even talking business. But, as you do when you're talking to your friends about like, what have you been up to? My client had shared something about a piece of work that she had done. And the friend said to her, "Oh, gosh, maybe I should be thinking about doing something like that in my business." Now, you might think, "Well, I don't know if that's a buying signal or not." Well, here's the thing. Even if you're not sure, like maybe it's a buying signal, maybe it's not. Your job is to still act on it. Your job is to still follow up and issue some kind of invitation to take the next step with you. So when somebody makes a positive comment in this particular case, or this like, maybe that's something I should be doing, your job is to say, is that something you'd like some support with? Or is that something I can help you with? Or is that something you'd like to talk about us working together? I'm giving you kind of these follow-up kind of questions. Now, the idea of a buying signal means you have to be turned on and tuned in to pick them up. They can be subtle. So when you go into these conversations, it's learning how to build your muscle, right? To like, oh, I'm turned on, I'm tuned in, and I'm a good listener, right? And if you feel like listening isn't one of your strengths, might be something for you to work on, right? And get to this place where before you go into lunch with a friend, or before you go into a meeting with a prospective client, or a networking, a coffee chat, anything. Think about like, am I going to be a good listener? Because if you're being a good listener, chances are you're going to pick up on a potential buying signal. Now, I had mentioned that there's two things that kind of keep people from acting on buying signals, two huge kind of things, reasons, challenges that keep us from acting on buying signals. And as I explain these, if you're thinking like, oh yeah, that one might be me, you're in good company, because these two things that I'm going to talk about are the most common things that people do that hinder themselves in sales. The first thing is that we project our limiting beliefs onto the other person. Now, what your limiting belief is might be different than what mine is, or the person sitting next to you, or the person that you just chatted with. But the idea of a limiting belief a lot of times is like, oh, I don't think they would want to work with me, or, oh, we're friends, so they probably want to work with somebody else, or they probably wouldn't even want to pay my fees for this particular service. These are all limiting beliefs. That's the first kind of mistake. And we project them onto the other person. And then the second mistake is we act as if we're mind readers. We act as if we know what they're going to say or do next. And so we don't even have the live conversation because it all exists in our head. We think, oh, well, if I acted on this buying signal and invited them to work with me, they're going to probably say, oh, it feels awkward now because we're friends. I'm not sure if I want to, have you working in my business. Like, you made that story up. That's you acting as if you're a psychic. Now, I do have some clients that are psychic. So if that's your business, by all means, I respect that and honor that. But if you don't have psychic as your title in your business, you do not get to mind read. You do not get to hallucinate and have a private conversation in your own mind and make up what the other person is saying. You just don't. You want to be respectful of the other person. You want to let them tell you whatever they're going to say. And maybe it'll turn out it wasn't a buying signal. Okay. That's all right. We'll talk about like, how do you handle those situations? But realistically, if you're projecting limiting beliefs and you're mind reading and making up the conversation in the privacy of your own mind, I mean, I don't know. I do this, right? Like, I have tons of conversations all the time in my mind between me and somebody else. Some of them are arguments. Some of them are, positive things. Some of them are, just mundane. Like, we all do it. But in this particular case, if your goal is to make a big impact in the world, which I think it is, right? Like, there's a reason you went into the business that you went into. There's a reason that you do what you do, and you want to make an impact in the world. Then you have to stop projecting. You have to stop mind reading and pretending as if you're a psychic, because chances are you aren't. And what you think they're going to say is not always right. Now, our mind likes to convince us like, oh, we know what this person's going to say, so therefore we don't have to say our part because we already heard their answer in the privacy of our own mind. Like, knock that stuff off. It's really not helping you at all. All right. So when you get a buying signal, because you've been a good listener, you're on the lookout for a buying signal from somebody. Again, verbal, nonverbal cue, somebody gives, indicating interest. Your job is to issue an invitation. Okay. So an invitation, I know I've given a few, but it might be something like, is that something we should schedule a time to chat more about? Or is that something you'd like to do together? Or, hey, we could get you signed up right now. Is that something you'd like to do? Right? There's all these things that you can say that are issuing an invitation. Now, once you issue the invitation, you got to zip it. You got to put your lips together and wait. You don't get to keep talking. You wait and see what they're going to say next. Okay. Now, what about those situations where you think, like, you leave the lunch or you leave the conversation with somebody and you start replaying it in your mind, like most of us do, like rehashing kind of this was said, that was said. And all of a sudden you get this light bulb moment and you think to yourself, like, oh my gosh, I think that person might have given me a buying signal and I didn't act on it. What should I do now? Okay, again, don't start mind reading, don't start hallucinating, don't start projecting your limiting beliefs here of like, oh, it's too late to follow up with them. Oh, I totally missed it. I missed my shot with them. No, we're going to actually follow up on that. Okay, we're going to reach back out to that person and we might just have a simple question. So you would start it by saying, you mentioned at lunch the other day that you might want to work on XYZ. Is that something we should explore on ways we might work together or how I could support you on that? Or, you mentioned possibly wanting to get this project started. Is that something you would ever bring me in to collaborate and work alongside you? Or is that something you would ever consider using my services for? Like, we got to follow up and just ask the question. So that could be sent in an email. You could send it in a text. You could call and leave it in a voicemail, whatever makes sense for you and the other person and, the way that you typically communicate with this person, and just ask and see. Now, the idea here is it's just about making conversation and exploring opportunities. You don't send like, hey, you mentioned you wanted help with this. Here's all my feeds and speeds of ways you can hire me. You don't go into sales mode. You go into question mode. So we got to issue that invitation and then we got to wait and see what the person says next. And if what they say next is like, no thanks, then that's like the worst case scenario, but it's not that bad, right? Because then you can just move on. You don't have to spend any more time or energy thinking about it. So if you follow up with that message and they go, oh no, I was just talking at lunch, or, oh yeah, I'm not really, thinking about doing that now. Okay. Then you could say, hey, if anything changes, please know you're always welcome to reach out to me. I'd, be honored to work with you. And that's all you have to do. And you don't have to bring it up again. It's like, okay, worst case scenario, they say no. Best case scenario is they say, "Oh, yeah, actually, I do need some help with that. Let's talk about ways to work together." Or, "Hey, I never really even thought about bringing you in for that, but yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, that would be great. Now you have a potential new client." And again, if your purpose in having your business is to make an impact in the world, we have to know how to recognize and act on buying signals. And we have to be willing to issue invitations and follow up when we recognize that maybe we missed a buying signal without fear of like the rejection. Because again, rejection to me is always just information. Sometimes it's a not yet. Sometimes you'll follow up on a potential buying signal and the person says, "Oh, yeah, no, I don't think I'm really ready to do something like that." And then a month later or a year later or, you know, 2 days later, you end up with a new client, the person that you issued that invitation to, because something changes or all of a sudden you've planted this seed and now they're thinking about, "Oh, actually, I do want to get my website redone," or, "Oh man, I really would benefit from having a coach to support me on this," or having somebody who could, redo my email campaigns or whatever it is that you offer. Don't rob people of the benefit that you can bring into their life and into their business because you're too caught up in your head about this idea of like, what if they reject me? What if it wasn't a buying signal? It's like, okay, it's just information. That's all it is. Doesn't hurt to ask. Okay, so the takeaway, I hope, for you in this episode is you got to recognize and act on buying signals when you get them. I mentioned I have a book on this, but I also have just a simple PDF where I outline all 17 of these buying signals. And if you don't have this yet, if you haven't explored buying signals, if you haven't been through my training on recognizing and acting on buying signals, it might be time, but I will happily gift you this PDF. And you can get it as a listener for free from me by just going to yoursalesmaven.com/maven. So that will take you to my little resource hub for my listeners. And you'll see it's one of the options there that you can download the 17 buying signals. You got to know what they are. So, recognizing and acting on buying signals, it first starts with you being a good listener. And then it follows up with you issuing an invitation and waiting and letting the other person respond. So whether that's in an email or whether that's in a live conversation in the moment, I really want them in the live conversations in the moment. Like that's when you have the highest of their attention span and you have the best opportunity to like take it to the next step. But even if you forget and you miss it in the moment and you think about it later, go ahead and follow up. And I hope actually listening to this episode, you start thinking about like, I was talking to so and so the other day. They might have given me a buying signal. Take this as your permission slip to follow up with that person and issue an invitation and see what they say. And if you book a new client, please reach out and let me know. And if they say like, thanks, no thanks, just say to yourself, like, oh, not yet. I planted a seed. Maybe it'll bloom. Maybe it won't. It's okay. It's not rejection. It's just information. All right. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I hope this particular episode gets you really thinking about and acting on buying signals because for many of my clients, this idea of knowing what to say when you get a buying signal, knowing how to issue those invitations, oftentimes is that switch in their business that like all of a sudden takes them to that next level because they get so good at this and they start bringing in new business as a result of it. And that's what I'm hoping for you. So again, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I'm wishing you so much continued success in every single thing that you're doing, and especially in recognizing and acting on buying signals. All right. Have a great rest of your day.